In my early 20s, I was studying at uni, and one lecture in particular changed the course of my dietary choices, my lifestyle, and really my life path overall. Today, I want to take you through the study that was presented in that lecture, what it means to me, and why I think you should pay attention to the evidence contained within it. So this lecture happened 9 years ago while I was undertaking a master's degree in agricultural and natural resource economics. The subject was food and environment, an economic perspective. The first topic we covered in this subject was the scarce environment, which referred to the fact that the environment has limits and humans might be reaching or surpassing those with our actions. Traditional economic models have firms, households and governments, with labour and capital flowing between them, and then only sometimes do they have the environment or the biosphere in the figure. And when they do, it's assumed to be an infinite source of whatever natural capital we need in order to do work, and an infinite sink for all our pollution and waste. But economics as a discipline is finally starting to realise that our economy relies completely on the natural world and is directly impacted by its changes. If you ask the sort of economists that they have on the ABC to ask about inflation and unemployment, you'll probably still get a blank stare if you bring up the scarcity of the environment or the unimportance of GDP compared to whether or not we've passed planetary boundaries. But we are more aware than ever that our behaviours as a species are wreaking havoc on our planet and its ecosystems. So this topic was about how to deal with the scarcity of natural resources and how we might meet everybody's needs within that scarcity. And we were shown this paper published in the journal Nature in 2011. It's not a big paper, only 7 pages, including figures and references, but it made a big impact on my way of thinking. The paper first lays out a problem that needs solving. The current situation is that roughly 1 in 7 people lack access to food or are chronically malnourished. Looking ahead to 2050, the estimated human population will be 10 billion, so 2 billion more people will need to be fed than currently. Also, our dietary patterns are changing, with more people eating meat and dairy, and that increases agricultural land use. Plus, we are steadily using more agricultural land for biofuels as well. The researchers say recent studies suggest that production would need to roughly double to keep pace with projected demands. Remember, this is doubling from a 2011 level. Agriculture is already the largest use of land, taking up more than a third of all land on Earth. Our cropland and pasture land has expanded over time by taking over grasslands or knocking down forests to make room. We've been increasing crop yields over time as well though, so we continue to increase the food grown in that way too. But there's a problem. We don't have an unlimited amount of land or fertiliser or water or an unlimited place for us to put all our agricultural gas emissions and nutrient runoff. Agricultural land has an impact on the world and on the ecological boundaries that the planet needs to stay within in order to be a safe place for humans and other species. Agriculture is now a dominant force behind many environmental threats, including climate change, biodiversity loss, and degradation of land and freshwater. Now, before learning about this stuff, I assumed that humans had sort of pockets of land that we use for growing food and building cities, and that the rest of the world was this huge swathe of wilderness. We hear about explorers finding new territories not that far back in history. And we read about the discovery of a new species of bird or octopus, and that paints a picture of a world that's still quite untouched. But this is the opposite of the truth. From the article, worldwide agriculture has already cleared or converted 70% of the grassland, 50% of the savanna, 45% of the temperate deciduous forest, and 27% of the tropical forest biome. A related statistic to this that stuck with me when I read it a few years ago is that if you took all land mammals on Earth and weighed them, 96% of that biomass are humans and our livestock. Only 4% are wild animals. A similarly startling figure occurs for birds, where 70% of all birds in the world are poultry for eggs, meat, feathers, and other uses. The environmental impacts of agriculture occur not just because of agricultural expansion, but of intensification too. We irrigate more cropland than ever before, with 70% of global freshwater withdrawals devoted to irrigation. We also take more rain for agriculture than for any other use. The water cycle is also affected by what we put in our crops, like fertilizer and manure, as well as where we grow legumes, which fix nitrogen in the soil. And of course, we can't forget the big one, greenhouse gas emissions. Agriculture is responsible for 30 to 35% of global greenhouse gas emissions, largely from tropical deforestation, methane emissions from livestock and rice cultivation, and nitrous oxide emissions from fertilised soils. So we have this big problem coming into the future of having to feed more people with not really any more land and not using so many resources, while also reducing emissions and nutrient runoff and biodiversity loss. This landed heavy with me. I wondered why more people weren't talking about this. I thought that we were onto it, that climate change was going to be fixed, that scientists and politicians couldn't possibly let this happen, let our agricultural system continue to wreak havoc on the natural world while not even feeding everyone properly who are already here living on this earth. But it turns out things have been getting gradually worse for decades, and the trajectory suggests it will continue down this path. While we are increasing crop yields and making efficiencies in some areas, in the global context, which is the one that matters for global issues like climate change, our expansion and intensification of the agricultural system is leading to the breaching of several really important planetary boundaries. So what exactly are the goals here? The researchers say we need to achieve the following. First, the transformation of agriculture must deliver sufficient food and nutrition to the world. To meet the projected demands of population growth and increasing consumption, we must roughly double food supplies in the next few decades. We must also improve distribution and access, which will require further changes in the food system. The transformation of agriculture should also 1. Cut greenhouse gas emissions from land use and farming by at least 80%. 2. Reduce biodiversity and habitat losses. 3. Reduce unsustainable water withdrawals, especially where water has competing demands. And 4. Phase out water pollution from agricultural chemicals. The researchers list 4 strategies to help meet these goals. The first is to stop taking over more land with agriculture, just to use the land we have. We need to especially stop expanding into tropical forests since it is such an important ecosystem. Second is to close yield gaps. A yield gap is the gap between the yield we currently get from a piece of land and what we could get if we optimized everything. I was surprised to learn that bringing yields to within 95% of their potential for 16 important food and feed crops could add 2.3 billion tonnes of new production, a 58% increase. By improving management of our existing crops, we could make a massive difference in how much food we grow. But we need to make sure that we do that without just heaping on more fertilizer or taking too much water from elsewhere, because that has flow-on effects as well. The third strategy is to increase resource efficiency. Change how we manage water, land, and fertilizer to get the most bang for our buck. Some areas of the world don't have enough nutrients, while in other places we're drenching our crops with too much nutrients, and not only are we wasting precious resources, but they're causing algal blooms and waterway acidification in the form of runoff. Lastly, we need to change our diets and lifestyles to get more of the food we grow directly into people's mouths instead of the mouths of livestock or into the bin. Part of this is called the diet gap. The researchers believe that shifting 16 major crops to 100% human food could add over 1 billion tonnes to global food production, a 28% increase, or a 49% increase in calories. Whether it's feedlot, pasture, rotational grazing with cows, chickens, or pigs, using land to grow food and then feeding it to animals and then eating the animals is an inefficient way of delivering food to people in almost every situation. We also need to reduce our food waste. In developing countries, food waste occurs more at the post-harvest stage of or during processing, whereas in developed countries like Australia, we waste most of our food at the retail or consumer level. In both scenarios, though, more than 40% of food grown is wasted before it gets to our plates. The study concluded with a statement saying that we can't just do one of these strategies. We need to do them all, at all levels, all around the world, if we want to meet the dietary needs of all humans without causing further environmental damage. No biggie, right? The study isn't particularly positive or negative about the prospect of whether this will actually happen in reality, but they do say the challenges facing agriculture today are unlike anything we have experienced before, and they require revolutionary approaches to solving food production and sustainability problems. I remain to this day unconvinced that the world's governments, businesses, and NGOs will do what's required to properly enact these strategies in order to meet the goals listed in the paper. And it's important to note that this study came out over 13 years ago now, and since then we have continued to increase meat and dairy consumption, deforestation has continued, methane emissions continue to rise. Things are still, on most of these important measures, getting worse. So, after learning the ins and outs of this study, I was left wondering what I could do to help solve this problem. I could work professionally in ag or science to help change the practices, but right then and there, what could I do in my own personal life? The obvious answer was to reduce my meat intake and reduce my food waste. The difference between how much meat I was eating and what is actually sustainable if everyone in the world acted as I did was startling. And once I started to look at it, the amount of food I was wasting was just silly, especially considering I was a relatively broke uni student at the time. My boyfriend at the time, not my boyfriend anymore, we've been married for 8 years now, is a vegetarian, mostly vegan I'd say now, and he's been a vegetarian since before I met him. So I already knew that it was totally possible for a fit, healthy adult to not require meat in their diet. My mum is also vegetarian, and so it wasn't unusual to be around people not eating meat growing up. But I loved my chicken and my beef mince and my sausages and meat pies. Although I considered myself an environmentalist, I hadn't really considered the impact of my diet on the planet. But after this study and learning more of the details around the environmental impacts of different diets, I decided to trial reducing my meat intake. For a while, I became what I called a chickenitarian, where I ditched all meat except for chicken, which was my favourite. It helped me realise just how much meat there was in my diet. Then a while after that, I had a planned surgery coming up, and I knew I wouldn't be cooking for myself or going out for dinner for a while during recovery. So I thought this would be a good time to try being vegetarian. I didn't hold myself at that time to the idea of never eating meat again, but then I'm not generally someone who flip-flops on my ideals, nor do I jump onto diet fads easily. So I stuck with it, and it became very normal. 9 years later, and I haven't eaten any meat since, and I have no regrets. In fact, now I've been vegan for 2.5 years, but I will talk about my veganism in another video, as it's less about the environmental aspect and more about animal rights. So if you're considering reducing meat in your diet or removing it altogether, know that it is a good thing to do as far as the environment goes. There are health benefits too, especially removing red meat and processed meats, which have evidence for causing cancer. Swapping meat for legumes, grains and vegetables is going to lower your risk of some of the massive killers of humans like heart disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes. There's already a mountain of information about the health side of plant-based diets, so I'll let you jump into that if you wish. Now, none of us individually are able to change the trajectory of the global agriculture system. Like I said before, I don't believe the actions required to fix this problem will occur, just based on the trends that existed back when this study was published and since then. And this doesn't account for any supply chain collapses, government instabilities, war, drought, or other natural disasters, all of which make it harder to get food to people. If I had to guess, I'd say that by 2050 there will be substantially more hungry people than there are now, and we will continue to smash through more planetary boundaries, and climate change will be worse, and people in general will choose to continue to increase their meat and dairy consumption and probably not take steps to reduce food waste until they don't have the choice anymore. I have decided to dedicate my life to the development of projects and ideas that help people get access to food that uses fewer resources and is good for the planet, as well as be more sustainable in general and encourage local connections so we can be prepared for the difficulties that the next few decades will hold. At the moment, this is happening in the form of my vegan zero waste store in my local town, as well as a few other smaller projects. I know I'm not going to save the world by doing this, nor by no longer eating animal products, but hopefully I can make it easier for the people in my community to live kindly and simply and with a more positive impact on the world around us. This started by reading scientific studies and increasing my knowledge of the current situation we're in and what the future might look like. If this information is eye-opening or interesting for you, please like this video. You can read the entire study via the link in the description, and please leave a comment to get the discussion going. I appreciate you for watching, and I'll see you next time.